Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. Monday morning in early August, a few years ago, as the regional sales director for Medicore Systems, a medical equipment manufacturing company, I had to travel out of town several times a month when client issues arose. This week was no exception. My flight was leaving O'Hare at 7:30 the next morning, and given Chicago's notorious traffic, I'd have to get up around 4 a.m. So Monday afternoon, I left work a little early and headed home. Work in Milwaukee went south as I expected, and I spent all of Tuesday afternoon and evening, plus half of Wednesday, helping our hospital client get their new imaging equipment back on track. I think Jerry, our on-site project manager, learned something in the process, but we'll be watching him more closely in the future. Wednesday afternoon, I headed back to I-94 to meet up with my colleagues in Indianapolis. Sarah Martinez, whom I had helped train in Chicago a few years earlier, was now the regional manager in Indianapolis and was scheduled to go on maternity leave in another month or two. Since she was a friend of mine and because of her impending absence, I kept a close eye on her accounts to make sure everything was documented so that whoever succeeded her would have clear instructions. As I expected, Sarah had everything in order. After dinner with Sarah and Tom, her husband, on Wednesday night and a planning meeting with her and her staff early Thursday morning, I caught a United flight and made my way through Chicago traffic to arrive at my office by 1:45. I reported to Mr. Patterson, my boss, on the situation with the Milwaukee account, my recommendations for increased supervision of the team there, and how Sarah and her team had performed in Indianapolis. He agreed with my suggestions for Milwaukee, asked a few questions about the transition when Sarah went on leave, and then told me to take the rest of the day off after I submitted my expense report. Once in my office, I quickly finished it up. Just as I reached for my phone to text Victoria that I would be home early before heading out, Derek Sullivan, my best friend since third grade and co-worker for the past 6 years, walked into my office and closed the door behind him. "Hey Marcus, how was your trip? Long but productive. Jerry should be able to keep things under control in Milwaukee for the rest of the project if he keeps a better eye on his supervisors. But right now I'm tired and I've had enough. So even though I love you like a brother, Derek, Mr. Patterson told me to get out of here." His face darkened at those words, and I laughingly explained, "No, he didn't fire me. It's just that I spent so many hours on this business trip helping them clean up the mess that Mr. P told me to take the day off to try to stay on the plus side of all you guys in accounting. So I'm gonna run to the store, buy some flowers and a bottle of wine, and be in a good mood when Victoria gets home. Anything work-related can wait until tomorrow." To my surprise, Derek raised his hand and said rather forcefully, "Marcus, stop. This isn't about work. I'm sorry, buddy, but I really need to talk to you now. It's about Victoria." "She's what? What's wrong with Victoria?" Fear pierced my heart. Something had happened to her, and no one could contact me because I was on that damn airplane. But why hadn't anyone called me since then? When I interrupted him, he stammered, "Marcus, she's been messing around while you're traveling." Anger lit up my face as I looked at the guy I'd considered my best friend practically forever. Victoria had told me that in her college years and the time that followed, she was a true free spirit, enjoying life to the fullest. But when we got more serious and started talking about a life together, she put those days behind her, saw a therapist for a while, and decided to settle down and start a family. Even though she was passionate with me, she had definitely put her wild days behind her. That's not funny, Derek. It's not funny in the slightest, and I don't appreciate it. I think you better get out of here and seriously consider our friendship before you walk into my office again." His face looked pained as he replied, "I know it's not funny, Marcus, and I hate telling you this more than you might know, but I really think it's true. I found out about it from Jake Campbell, who found out about it from his friend Clay. Clay's friend was someone she was involved with. From what he casually told Clay afterward, he wasn't the only one she was seeing, which is why he didn't keep it a secret. It ticked him off that she was cheating on him too. I knew it wasn't true. It couldn't be true. And I was so furious that I was ready to rip Derek's head off for falling for such a stupid rumor. However, I knew my wife much better than Derek did, and so my anger turned toward those who spread such lies and the nameless jerk who started it. Come to think of it, I wasn't giving Derek a pass either. What's more, I was doubly angry that my supposedly best friend was helping them spread lies like this. Derek, I'm going to tell you this once. It's not true, not one word of it. And if you ever repeat a word of it, I'll beat the hell out of you. Now you'd better get out of here before I decide to do it anyway. Derek was 6 feet tall and weighed 180 pounds. He had always been a skinny kid, a typical nerd, so he knew that I, with my size, could do it if I wanted to. The whole world seemed to rest on his shoulders as he looked at the ground and shook his head slowly. He looked up at me, and I could see the pain in his eyes. Marcus, I'm sorry. We've been best friends for a long time, so you know I would never want to hurt you. But I really think that by not telling you, you'll end up hurting a lot more. And buddy, you know that I know you well enough to know that you would react exactly like this. You've always had a temper, and how many times have I had to step in and calm you down to keep you from getting arrested or worse in high school? Marcus, I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't think it was true. I'm leaving, but this way you may not believe me, but here's the name of the investigator my cousin hired when he thought his wife was cheating on him. This lady is good, and if she tells you Victoria did something wrong, know it's the gospel truth. I took a deep breath and held it for a moment, willing the blood rushing in my temples to calm down a bit. I'm not sure it worked, but it helped me clear my thoughts and put things in better perspective. Derek was right. We'd been best friends since his family had moved next door when we were little, and we'd been close ever since. We were both smart. I was the salutatorian of our high school class in the Chicago suburbs, finishing second to him. But he was the poised nerd who kept us out of trouble when he could, and I was the flashy athlete who physically pulled us out of a few messes when his efforts didn't work. We went to different colleges, me to business with a marketing focus at Northwestern, and him to accounting at University of Illinois. Over time, I matured a lot without his help in managing my temper, although I must admit that a few extra bumps along the way without his guidance helped the process. When I heard about a vacancy in my firm's accounting department, I let him know how much I liked the firm. To my surprise, he applied, and I put in a good word for him. So we've been working together for 6 years now, including all the time Victoria and I dated before getting married almost 5 years ago. Looking back, I realized that while I didn't think for a minute that his story was true, Derek must have been led to believe it was true and that he was telling me to protect me, not to intentionally hurt me. Exhaling slowly, I asked, "Your cousin's wife, was she?" "Oh yes, and Miss Foster made inquiries about her and what happened to them." Derek grimaced. "He divorced her, but he still has to see her twice a week when they exchange the kids. He loves those children and will do anything to protect them, and that's a damn good thing because he hates her so much he'd probably have destroyed her by now and happily gone to death row otherwise. I'm so sorry, man." After handing me the card, he walked out of my office, closing the door behind him. I was left alone to mull over his crazy accusations and what he'd said about his cousin. I felt sorry for the guy who had a woman he loved and trusted do this to him. However, not knowing the circumstances, I mostly sympathized with the kids. They didn't choose their parents and the mess they were born into. The reason this hit me particularly hard was that Victoria and I were discussing the imminent expansion of our family. We wanted a boy and a girl if the genetic odds worked in our favor, but we were considering 3 children if our chromosomes cooperated in the first 2 tries. I sat at my desk looking at the door for a couple of minutes, trying to calm myself down before packing up and heading out. I drove home to my wife, trying to put everything Derek had said out of my mind. Unfortunately, the seed he'd planted was festering, not wanting to be forgotten. As I pulled onto the highway to head home, I thought about telling Victoria about this foolishness, but something stopped me. Although I was sure it wasn't true, there was no reason to make her angry that people, including Derek, were telling such horrible lies about her. After a quick stop at the grocery store, I remained silent as Victoria threw herself into my arms as I entered the kitchen from the garage. "You're home early," she said, but it was no more than what I could manage as our lips came together and we tried to make up for missing each other since Tuesday morning when we separated. She nodded. "I thought you'd be back early. So I worked late the last 2 nights so I could leave early today to greet you. God, I missed you so much, Marcus." I looked back at her, thinking about how beautiful she was, how funny she was, and what utter nonsense that idiot friend of Derek's or friend of a friend or whatever had spread. I knew for a fact that Victoria loved me and would never cheat on me. With that being said, I shook my head and put Derek's stupid story out of my mind. Derek and I had been friends for so long that I realized he would never have told me everything the way he did if he didn't believe it himself. Victoria was soon asleep in bed, a satisfied smile on her face as she dozed off. I sat up in bed trying to read my book, but the words on the page refused to be picked up by my brain. My thoughts were preoccupied with my wife and the impossible story my best friend had told me. As much as Victoria loved me the Monday before the trip and today after I returned home, I knew that the messages Derek had received were fake, and that I had to prove it to him or it would jeopardize our friendship even more than his supposed warning. I went to bed that night still trying to figure out what to do, but as I was driving to work Friday morning, it hit me. I would contact the private investigator Derek had suggested. However, I wouldn't be calling her to make her prove that Victoria had cheated on me. No, without believing it, I would ask Miss Private Investigator to prove that Victoria had not cheated. Friday morning, I called Caroline Foster's office and agreed to the first available appointment on Monday afternoon. The office was in downtown Chicago, so I left myself a little extra time and walked into the office about 10 minutes before 2 o'clock. Before marrying Victoria, I had been well employed for several years and kept my large investment account in my own name, which allowed me to surprise her from time to time with gifts or trips without her knowledge. This time, I would use some of the funds to hire an investigator so Victoria would never have to find out about the silly rumor when Miss Foster proved it false. At 2 o'clock, I was summoned by a secretary and escorted to a conference room at the end of the hallway, where a rather statuesque African-American woman dressed in professional black slacks, an expensive white blouse, and a red scarf rose from behind a desk to greet me as soon as the assistant closed the door behind me. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson. Welcome to Foster Private Investigation Services. I'm Caroline Foster. How can we help you?" She was tall and very professional. Her grip was strong, and I guessed she'd kept herself in great shape since, according to her firm's website, she'd retired from the Chicago Police Department a few years ago. From her online bio, I figured she was in her mid-50s, though she seemed younger in person. She smiled warmly, but her eyes kept scrutinizing me, picking up on my body language, as I suspected, as well as whether I was hiding anything. "Hello, Miss Foster. I'm Marcus Thompson, and I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice. My problem is relatively simple. In an average month, I travel 2 or 3 times, usually for 1 or 2 nights. As a result, someone has made up a story about my wife cheating on me. I want you to investigate and prove that this is not true, that she has not been cheating." She expressionlessly began asking me questions, and over the next hour, I told her everything I knew about the allegation and much about Victoria, while realizing that the problem might not be as simple as I had previously thought. Her questions were insightful, and she asked several questions to clarify or get additional information, taking brief notes along the way, particularly about Victoria's history both before our relationship began and in our life together. I felt devastated when she finally put aside her pen and said, "Thank you for that information, Mr. Thompson. According to the client information sheet you filled out before coming in, you have a bachelor's and master's degree in business from Northwestern. How familiar are you with the philosophy of our legal system, and in particular, the burden of proof?" That was a question I hadn't expected. I had an introductory philosophy course when I was an undergrad, and I've been a witness in a couple of court cases at my firm, but as far as the details and substance of your question, no, not very much. She nodded. "You came to me with a specific request to prove that your wife was not having an affair, Mr. Thompson. That is what is called proving a negative. In some cases, you can prove that something did not happen. For example, a particular wine glass was never broken because it holds wine and you can visually verify that it is in perfect condition with no cracks. That's easy. But what about a person?" She seemed to think for a moment before continuing. "Let's see. I can prove that I didn't go out of town and rob a bank yesterday because I have a positive alibi to prove that I was here in town all day. But what about one day last week, last year, or even 10 years ago? You see, Mr. Thompson, in most cases, there are no ironclad records for any significant period of time that can prove a negative. So let's apply that to your case. I can have one of my investigators observe your wife for a week or even a month and tell you with reasonable certainty that she did not have, or, as the case may be, did have an affair during that time. But I cannot prove that she did not have an affair the day or week or perhaps several months before our investigation began. For that reason, proving a negative doesn't work in your case, so the cloud of this silly accusation really will hang over her head forever. I muttered, already realizing that what Miss Foster said was true. Perhaps. But if we watch her under the right circumstances and nothing happens, we can infer from her actions, which she will or will not take, that something is probably true. We will be able to say with certainty that she either did or did not stray while being watched, and this will also allow us to find evidence of her past behaviors, if any. Most importantly, however, we will never be able to say with certainty that she never did. If that scenario works for you, Mr. Thompson, we'll be happy to take your case. If not, we wish you well and good luck finding someone who will do what you ask. Realizing where she was going with this, I hired Foster's private investigation service and spent another couple of hours with one of Miss Foster's investigators, answering more questions, filling out forms, and planning for those appropriate circumstances she was talking about. I had been working in the Chicago office all week, so on Saturday night, after Victoria went to bed, I went down to the basement and tripped a circuit breaker in the panel. I didn't notice anything Sunday morning, but by the time we got home from church and lunch with some friends, the house was noticeably warmer. Victoria immediately complained, and I said I would go downstairs and check the circuit breaker. I flipped a few circuits that didn't make a difference, turned them off and on again, and then went back upstairs. I didn't find anything wrong, so I'm going to call the HVAC service. Please do. If you don't, it's going to be too hot to sleep up there tonight. I dialed the number for our regular HVAC service company and got their automated system, pushing buttons, going from menu to menu until I was on hold for almost 10 minutes, and then hung up. I then called the number Caroline Foster had given me. Hello, this is Marcus Thompson. We're having a problem with the air conditioning upstairs. How soon can you send someone over to check it out? Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Okay, I think that'll work. Thanks. See you then. Victoria overheard the end of the conversation. It's too hot upstairs, so we'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight. It'll be like we're in a hotel room, she added with a smile. Taking Victoria's suggestion into consideration, I felt better than I had at any time since Derek had shared that idiotic accusation. There was no way Victoria could love me so much and still do what that confused person was claiming she did. We got up Monday morning, and Victoria made me strip the sheets and throw them in the wash on the way to the shower. Monday morning, I worked from home and met with the HVAC guy, a subcontractor who was regularly engaged by Foster's private investigative service, at 10 o'clock as planned. I showed him around our house, and he got to work while I went downstairs. An hour later, he was done. They are motion activated and stay on for 5 minutes after the motion ends. They have fiber optic lenses with a wide angle of view, so they can record anything you need with very little chance of being noticed unless someone has a special reason to look for them. These devices will capture everything with quality good enough for legal purposes. 3 in your bedroom, 1 in each of the other main rooms, and 1 monitoring the front entrance. If anything happens within sight of any of them, we'll record it. After paying him for the installation and 2 weeks monitoring, I thanked him and went to work. When I got home, it was comfortable in the house. Hey babe, there were some problems with the hospital job in Detroit, so I'll have to add it to this week's trip. I was already going to be in Milwaukee Tuesday night, but I decided to visit Detroit as well. Linda made arrangements with the airlines very quickly, so my flight from Detroit won't arrive until late Friday night. I'll try to change to an earlier flight if something's available, but Linda said the chances of that are pretty slim. I'm really sorry. I'm really going to miss you, Victoria said, but let's try to catch up at least a little, smiling as she took my hand and led me to the couch in the family room. I love you, Marcus. I love you too, Victoria, I replied, meaning it. I smiled, realizing that there was nothing wrong with our marriage except some idiot who would never know what it was like to be with my woman. The meetings in Milwaukee went well, and the follow-up issues in Detroit were manageable. In fact, I usually handle them remotely, but my showing up on-site helped keep our management team on track. Once everything was settled, I spent some time observing the quality of our equipment installation, making observations and pointing out potential improvements to the assistant project manager who showed me around. He was young but bright, and I mentally noted that he would soon be ready for more responsibility. I could have left Thursday afternoon if I could find a flight, but I didn't bother trying. Victoria wasn't expecting me until Friday night, and I was going to give her every possible minute of that time to prove to Miss Foster that she had ample opportunity but wouldn't cheat on me. So I worked in my hotel room until noon, and early Thursday evening, I went to one of Detroit's famous shooting ranges where, in addition to the usual pistols and rifles, machine guns can be rented. I limited myself to renting a couple of pistols and let the tourists, torn away from their kids and casino scenes for a while, spend their hard-earned money on the more exotic options. Friday, I worked at our client's site until it was time to head to the airport. The traffic on I-94 Friday night was probably as bad as the Loop, and it wasn't much better on I-90 either. I breathed a sigh of relief when I finally reached our exit and was thrilled when I walked into the house and my loving wife threw herself into my arms. Seeing that I looked stressed, she brought me a beer, and we snuggled together on the couch and talked for a while before she led me upstairs. On Saturday, Victoria went to the gym, and I took care of the yard. After going inside to get a drink of water and watch the Cubs game, I opened my laptop and checked my personal email account. To my relief, there was nothing there from the special address that Caroline Foster's investigator had given me. I checked again on Sunday afternoon while she ran some errands and did some shopping. This time, I blinked tensely a few times before hesitantly clicking on the message to open it. As I did so, I muttered, "Please, Lord, let this just be an update. Dear Mr. Thompson, your order will be ready on Monday at 11 a.m. Please contact our office to arrange for delivery. Wilson Tool Works." My hand shook as I closed the message, deleted it, and then permanently deleted it from my trash folder. Victoria noticed I didn't look well when she got home, and I avoided her kisses. "Yeah, I don't feel so good," I replied. "I don't want you to get sick too. Let me give you a hug, and then you rest while I make dinner. Hopefully you'll feel better and be able to eat in a little while." She hugged me, but I was worried beyond belief. As I held her, I caught the scent of unfamiliar flowers. I didn't eat Sunday night, and I got up very early Monday morning. I thought about it while trying to sleep. The smell of flowers in her hair was not her usual shampoo, conditioner, or perfume. I didn't want to believe that something was going on, but the unusual scent and the ominous message made me question whether something could really be happening after all. She'd been gone for quite a while, right? No, she couldn't have had time to shop and do anything else, right? Yeah, it had to be one of those perfume samples they spray at department stores. After confirming the appointment on Monday morning, I arrived at Miss Foster's office just before 11 a.m. I was escorted into the same conference room as the first time, and as before, Miss Foster greeted me. This time, she gestured toward a chair and said, "Mr. Thompson, we have concluded our investigation ahead of schedule, and I'm afraid I have some bad news." She slid the file folder toward me and leaned back in silence as I opened it. My world, always so orderly, crumbled around me as I skipped reading the report and went straight to the photos. There she was with a man in our bedroom. This was followed by another picture, but still in our bedroom. Wait, the guy in this picture doesn't look like the guy in the first one. Sorry, it's all in the report, but we documented her with 3 different men in 4 encounters through Saturday, and yesterday afternoon, we observed the second encounter repeated, this time at a private residence. "What?" I exclaimed. The news and all the numbers stunned me. But she went shopping yesterday. Her look was serious. She nodded. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson did some shopping on Saturday afternoon after her second meeting with subject number 2, and on Sunday, she only went to the grocery store. You could have checked receipts or maybe a credit card if she didn't use cash. But she was going to the gym on Saturday," I whispered, still trying not to believe the evidence clearly laid out in front of me. Miss Foster shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. From the picture of her leaving the hotel with subject number 2, we believe she was doing a different kind of exercise, but believe me, she was nowhere near a real gym." "How can that be?" I demanded, my anger finally overcoming disbelief. 3 different guys in 1 week, and that doesn't include what I thought we had together before and after. Miss Foster held up a hand to calm me. I'm not a psychiatrist, Mr. Thompson, just a good investigator and a pretty good judge of human character. Your wife seems a likely candidate for hypersexuality disorder, often called nymphomania in earlier years. She seems to be going way beyond the ordinary and covering up what she did so you wouldn't find out. Flowers, I sighed. The scent of flowers in her hair. She took a shower and washed her hair after seeing her friend yesterday. Maybe, but judging by how long they were in there, most likely just washed it or used some kind of scented product. From what we can tell by following her and watching the recordings, she's an expert at what she does, and she's obsessed with covering her tracks. Even changing the sheets and linens on your bed between encounters. In our bed, I began, remembering that she'd even changed the sheets in the guest bed just a week ago. Yes, 2 of the 3 nights you were gone, she brought them to your bed. She brings her. Miss Foster paused at my sharp look. She brings these men to your residence. Please don't call them that. Cheating, adulteress, I began. She hummed slightly and nodded in response to my comment. At least one of them, yes. We don't know the first one's name, and the third one isn't married, but assuming he knew of her marital status, that makes him an accessory to her adultery. Now, the second one seems to be her regular. Well, he's definitely a cheater and an adulterer. We were able to get his identity and found out he's married. I sighed, opening the folder and rummaging through it until I found the page with his picture at the very top. My fists clenched as I tried to keep from punching the desk. I think she works with him, I said. I was just about to get to that. Brandon Mitchell, 32, married, and as far as we can tell, became your wife's supervisor at her firm a few months ago. Being a large, important firm with multiple offices, they don't advertise their corporate management structure, so it's possible he works in another, possibly parallel department. I shook my head. No, you got that right. Mrs. Allen was promoted, I think in late spring, and Mr. Mitchell became her new manager. Victoria never called him by name and said he wasn't very social, so I haven't met him yet. But she pointed him out to me one day when I stopped by to pick her up when her car was in the shop. It was Miss Foster's turn to shake her head, though it was a look of disbelief. Not very social with the spouses of his, well, no doubt a convenient excuse to keep you 2 apart. Anyway, Mr. Mitchell has no priors or outstanding warrants, but he does have several unpaid parking tickets. Your wife met him at a bar Wednesday night and drove him to your house for a little over an hour, then drove him back. That's how we got his name from DMV records and found his firm's information through web searches and professional networking. What a bastard, I sighed, clenching and unclenching my fists so I wouldn't accidentally break something. Miss Foster continued, Take it easy, Mr. Thompson. We're not done yet. She met with him at the hotel on Saturday afternoon and then again yesterday, but this time, as I said, at a residence. According to the tax records, it's Mr. Mitchell's residence. If Mrs. Mitchell had arrived a few minutes earlier or your wife had left a few minutes later, Mrs. Thompson would probably be dealing with her as well. Her game is already lost, but she just doesn't know it. I hissed. You know, Miss Foster, in my youth, I was pretty wild and ran after any woman who showed interest. It took a while, but eventually, I realized that it wasn't getting me anywhere. I needed something more, and I met Victoria just when I needed it. She admitted that she was the same way in college and that she'd had a few relationships along the way, but she said she loved me, that she wanted to settle down, that couldn't go on. Miss Foster patted my arm. I smiled weakly at her in gratitude and looked again at the sheet with Brandon Mitchell's picture on it. My face hardened at the thought of what I would want to do to this cheating, lying, adulteress. Miss Foster grabbed my arm again, harder this time, forcing me to look into her eyes. Mr. Thompson, I'm very sorry for the way things turned out, but I must warn you, as I do all of my clients, not to let the pain you are feeling make you do something that is not in keeping with who you are. When a person finds out that their loved one has been cheating on them, they often want revenge to make the cheater feel hurt. But if you do that and take it too far, well, if you do that, it can ruin your life. Do you realize that? Taking my hand, she made me nod before she continued. Don't let her mistake ruin your future. If you retaliate too hard, you could go too far and end up in jail for a while or even prison, possibly for years. You could lose your job and almost everything you have worked for your entire adult life. You don't have children, so you don't have that to worry about, but that doesn't mean you can't create huge problems for yourself. Whatever you decide, just be careful and remember that it's her mistake, not yours. There were so many things swirling around in my head. Betrayal confirmed. Children so close but not now. Revenge? Maybe not, but payback? Yes, definitely. I wouldn't be an idiot and let my anger destroy me. I'd be careful to control my emotions, but in my carefully calibrated reaction, I'd be just as devious and calculating as she had been in deceiving me, no matter how long she'd been doing it. I knew I would never physically hurt her. I wasn't that kind of person. But make her suffer? Yes, I would. Carefully, but believe me, Miss Foster, if that's the way my soon-to-be ex-wife wants it, then that's the way it will be. I'll try not to go too far, but believe me, it'll be close, and she'll feel all the pain she's caused me, every single bit. Miss Foster sighed, realizing she couldn't stop me, but she made one last attempt to calm me. Okay, please be careful, Mr. Thompson. Remember what you said and don't go too far. Going over the edge is a lot easier than you think. I don't want what you do to come back and haunt you. As a divorce attorney, Miss Foster recommended Robert Chin. He agreed to meet with me after hours, and I spent the next 2 hours on a bench in Millennium Park, contemplating my strategy and my revenge. Then I gathered up all my notes and went to see him. Mr. Chun was an elderly man who, as it turned out, was Miss Foster's uncle and was as short, stocky, and jovial as she was tall, elegant, and reserved. But he knew family law inside and out. He also knew the Illinois legal system like the back of his hand, as he had practiced law for nearly 40 years. Robert acted very informally, insisting that we call each other by our first names, and chatted for a bit before getting into why I chose divorce over attempted reconciliation. When I showed him the folder of photos, he whistled softly. I think that answers that question. Okay, what we're going to need. I handed him the flash drive with all the records Miss Foster had suggested, and he plugged it into his laptop, said, a few times, and then said a couple more before smiling in the general direction of his niece. This girl really knows her stuff, Marcus. Everything looks complete, so I'll put it all together and let you know when we're ready to file. I can have it ready by next Monday. Oh, I can do it by then, but the rush will cost you extra. Do it, please. I then told him my plan, including an additional request. When I finished, his face expressed nothing. You have to be careful, Marcus. Very careful. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but you're entering into a legal proceeding where you can't go too far. The judge will decide the case according to the law, but if you don't think appearance and attitude play a role, I have a great bridge I can sell you that spans the Chicago River downtown. I forced myself to smile, knowing that while there was indeed a river in downtown Chicago, it wasn't exactly big. I got home late Monday night, claiming fatigue and the need to rest after a minor illness. I avoided Victoria, still showing signs of an ailment that wasn't really there. I showered and brushed my teeth, trying to put all traces of betrayal out of my mind. Tuesday morning, I got up early and, without waking her, quietly slipped out of the house to catch my flight to Milwaukee. Thursday night, I made the call I had been dreading. Derek, hey, it's Marcus. Listen, buddy, I need to apologize, and I need to apologize really badly. You were right, and I was as wrong as I could be. Derek, being the closest thing to a brother I had, immediately forgave me and asked how he could help. I stayed away late Friday night and then complained that I was tired, so she wouldn't even think about intimate time. Saturday morning, I went to my parents' house to help my dad with a home improvement project that was supposedly rescheduled for Sunday. I really wanted to tell him what was going on, but I knew I needed to wait until things settled down. Then the timing would be right, and it would be too late to mess something up that I shouldn't have. So I called Victoria late Saturday night to let her know I wouldn't be home until the following afternoon. But when she answered, I got the distinct impression that she wasn't home and that she probably wasn't alone. I held my tongue, uttering a curt but completely fake "love you" before ending the conversation. On Sunday afternoon, while Victoria was out on the town, no doubt with one of the low-life bastards who'd been seeing her Mr. Chan sent me a text. I quickly phoned him, and he confirmed that everything would be ready. The process server he hired agreed to serve the papers on Monday at 11 a.m. as per my special request and send me a text message as soon as he met with her. I immediately excused myself from my parents' house and hit the road, leaving Victoria a note saying that I had some urgent business at work and for her to call me at the office if she needed me. I drove to the office and spent the rest of the evening finalizing my plans. Victoria called twice that evening, and both times I told her that the case was dragging on and that I would be even later than I had told her before. I promised that I would leave early Monday morning, and we would spend the entire evening together. That must have been what she wanted to hear because her mood became light and cheerful, and she expressed her love to me before we finally ended the conversation. I was lying to her, of course, but given the web of lies and deceit she was weaving around me, I figured turnabout was fair play. After Victoria left for work, I walked through the house with a roll of bright yellow painter's tape and stuck a piece on everything I owned or had owned before our marriage. Anything that pertained to community property, I decided she would get as part of our settlement agreement or could donate to charity. At 7:45, Derek showed up, and a few minutes later, the crew from the moving company arrived. I helped them get started, and then Derek took over supervision while I finished packing what I needed for the short term. Everything that was going in the truck would go to storage. Victoria hadn't noticed that I'd cleaned out my gun safe and taken everything to my parents' house to put in my dad's safe on Saturday. I was almost done and was about to leave, planning to leave the rest to Derek, when Amy, Victoria's neighbor and friend, saw the truck and came out to ask if we were moving. Luckily, I got to her before she could look into the truck or see that I had piled a bunch of stuff in the back of my SUV in the garage. "Shoo!" I said with a grin. "I'm surprising Victoria with some new furniture in honor of our upcoming anniversary, 5 years next week. I'm clearing out some old furniture and some clutter from the house before they deliver the new stuff tonight. It's a surprise, and it's a little early because of their delivery schedule. So please don't mention it to her or anyone else until she tells you herself." She agreed, smiling, and went on her way. By noon, the news would likely spread throughout the neighborhood. So I was glad that X hour was already at 11 o'clock. I gave each of the movers a generous tip, then shook Derek's hand and thanked him before heading to the bank. I was there when they opened at 9 a.m. and withdrew half the money from our joint accounts in the form of a cashier's check. A few minutes later, I was at the credit union and deposited the cashier's check into a new account I had set up online. At 11:15, I pulled into the parking lot of an office building in Schaumburg and opened my laptop. I had already applied for a new credit card in my name only, so since the current card had a zero balance, I closed the joint account. This took longer than planned, and as a result, I started sweating from the time pressure. By 10:57 a.m., however, it was done, and I logged into our family email account, where we were both listed and waited for the text message to arrive on my phone. As planned, at 11 a.m., process server just asked about her. A reply came back that she was on her way. Another text came a minute later. "She's in the lobby now." Almost shaking with nerves, I uploaded the already prepared message to our email. I considered going to Victoria's work email and sending the version I'd written and really wanted to send from there since I knew her password, but Caroline Foster's warning about going too far and her uncle's confirmation that if I did what I wanted, I'd end up in very hot water with the judge, and maybe even in jail for a night, put an end to that idea for now. The message went out to several of our friends and family. It reported that something had happened between us and that I had filed for divorce as a result. 3 photos were included in the file rather than attached so they wouldn't be deleted from the message. Victoria and Brandon's faces were visible in each of the photos. However, again heeding the warnings about not going too far, the photos were carefully cropped and edited to hide any explicit details, but it was quite obvious what was going on. Judging by the timestamp when the second message, the one I really wanted to send, remained unused on the flash drive. Finally, the message was not sent to Victoria or Brandon. There was no need to warn them of the impending storm. The message was ready and looked right, so I hit send. After making sure it sent correctly, I quickly logged out, closed my laptop, and put it under my seat. My phone rang at 11:03. It was Victoria, and I answered it. "Marcus, what the hell is this? A divorce? Why?" I thought we were happy together. Did you find someone else? I laughed at her hysteria. You thought we were happy? No, I thought we were happy until I found out what you were doing. Yeah, I know. Look on the back of the envelope. I asked my lawyer to put something in the package. I heard her swearing and yelling over the phone, promising me unbreakable love as she had in front of God, the pastor, and many of our friends and family at church 5 years ago. She yelled over the phone, Marcus, no, it's not what it looks like. Really, no, Marcus. Let me explain. No, Victoria. I don't think you have the time to adequately explain this. We're done here. My attorney's contact information is in that packet. If you need anything, feel free to contact him. I hung up while she was still talking, or rather, practically yelling into the phone. When she realized I was no longer there, she called back again, and I sent the phone to voicemail. She left one message, seemingly a long one, and a few minutes later, a text message from her came through. The voicemail message was all the same denial and lies, so it was deleted, as was the text and the 3 messages and the next voicemail message that followed in quick succession. Not wanting to hear any more of her crocodile tears, listen to the lies, excuses, and apologies, and certainly not wanting to hear any more promises since she had already violated the one sacred vow that really mattered, I didn't listen to the new messages or read the texts before deleting them. I then blocked Victoria's number. Immediately afterward, I dialed my father-in-law's number. Since Bob and Linda were my friends as well as my in-laws, I didn't bother sending them a message. Hi Bob, this is Marcus. I hate to call you at work, but this is important and I think you need to hear it firsthand, not secondhand. And I'm going to do it now, not later, because things just hit the fan. I think I heard him gulp over the phone. What's going on, son? Bob, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but because of Victoria's inability to honor her marital vows, I'm forced to end our marriage. Marcus, no. I know my daughter's history, but that has changed. You can't take it seriously by holding something from long ago over her. Bob, I would never do that, but she has relapsed, and a very serious one at that. And not too long ago. 2 weeks ago, when I was out of town, it was like she went crazy. I have the locations, dates, and times to prove it, as well as pictures and even video of some of it. It's been killing me since I found out, and I hate to tell you this, especially over the phone, but you should know that I'm not doing this because I want to, but because I can't trust her anymore. And I can't keep this up, so I'm going to end this right now. The papers were filed this morning, and she's already received them. No, I can't believe it. She promised me she was already past this stage. There was desperation in his voice, utter denial. She promised all of us, Bob, but apparently her promises weren't enough for her to keep them. If she had stayed true to them and to me, I would have loved her forever. You know that. But now it's too late, and the love I had for her has faded, dried up, and blown away. However, I still love you and your wife, and I don't want to hurt you, which is why I am telling you this directly and not by email. My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law expressed deep regret for what his daughter had done to us as a couple, as well as to his family and me as friends. With regret in his voice, we said goodbye. I quickly called Linda, but the call went to voicemail. I suspected Bob had her phone on speed dial, so I left a short message. It was now 11:16 a.m., and I proceeded with the only part of my plan that I had any doubts about. If I did this part, I would hurt a stranger who probably didn't deserve it, but if I didn't, I might end up getting hurt even more. So I put on sunglasses, a baseball cap, and a lanyard with a laminated ID for a delivery company that, to my knowledge, doesn't exist, but with Derek's phone number at the bottom. He knew to answer Sunshine Process Serving. To all calls, he didn't recognize between 11 o'clock and 11:30 a.m. I popped some gum in my mouth and walked into the building. At the security desk, I said, "Hi, Marcus Thompson from Sunshine Couriers and Process Serving. I have a special package for Mrs. Jennifer Mitchell." The guard frowned. Such packages should go to the receiving center on the lower level. "No, that's not what the courts say," I said, doing my best imitation of Chevy Chase from the old movie Fletch. "Special service requires a photo ID and a personal signature. It's usually best done quietly, but we can make a scene if you want, and I'll end up having to run all over town to track her down, which will end up getting her in even more trouble." No, wait, the guard said. What do you want? I go to her firm, meet her in the lobby, ID her and get her signature. In 5 minutes, I'm out of here. No hassle, no fuss. He nodded slowly. To go upstairs, you must have a visitor's pass. I need to hold your ID while you have it. Got it, I agreed, handing him my driver's license with some reluctance. He took it and handed me the pass. Come back at once. You'll get this back, he said, holding up my license. When you return the badge. Got it. I nodded to him and blew a small bubble, then turned and headed for the elevator. On the 23rd floor, a few minutes later, I walked up to the front desk at Jennifer Mitchell's firm. The same conversation was waiting for me there. The woman behind the counter looked even more hesitant than the guard in the main lobby, but she pressed a button and summoned Mrs. Mitchell to the reception area. Noticing a trash can in the lobby, I threw away the gum and took off my baseball cap, putting it in the bag I was using as my messenger briefcase. Fletch's identity was gone. Jennifer Mitchell was very pretty, in her late 20s or early 30s, with olive skin, dark brown hair, and dreamy brown eyes that made me think she had Hispanic heritage. When she entered the firm's lobby, she had a concerned look on her face. When the receptionist pointed her out, Mrs. Mitchell looked at me and hesitated for a moment before heading in my direction. Jones said you had something for me to sign? She said hesitantly. No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm Marcus Thompson. You don't really need to sign anything, but I have to give this to you since it concerns you. What is it? Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband was having an affair with my wife. My words were spoken in a whisper, and I held out to her a carefully cropped photograph of them together. In the envelope are documents that prove everything, absolutely everything. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she shook her head in denial. It has to be a forgery. Brandon promised me. It's not a forgery, Mrs. Mitchell. I paid good money to a detective agency to find out what was going on with my wife and asked them to prove she wasn't having an affair after rumors of it reached me. They proved the opposite, that she was having one. Enclosed in the envelope is confirmation that everything you see here is real, unedited, and obtained legally with my permission. I have been assured by a private investigation firm and my attorney that all of this will be admissible in court if you choose to go that route. As of this morning, that's what I'm doing. But he promised, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She leaned toward me, and I put my right arm around her and gently patted her back. He said the first time was a mistake, that it was just a moment of weakness, and that it wouldn't happen again. We took steps to make sure it wouldn't happen, and now he's going back on that and doing it again. Again. Why? I don't know, Mrs. Mitchell, but this time it didn't happen on impulse. It was carefully planned, and it happened more than once. In the envelope, you will find documents of 3 meetings between them in 5 days. Her hand clutched at my shirt, and she shook her head in short, quick movements against me, realizing the extent of her husband's betrayal. At 5'5" and about 130 pounds, I was 7 or 8 inches taller than her. She wiped her tears and looked at me again. The flow had stopped, but her cheeks were still wet from the recent downpour. Mister, I'm sorry, what's your name again? I told her, and she continued, I'm about to check out for lunch and afterward, I'll send a picture just of me if you want to show him. Mrs. Mitchell, you are a beautiful woman, and I am honored by the invitation, even if it sounded more like anger than desire. But no, ma'am, you won't do it? I said, pulling her a little tighter against me, trying to help her get over her anger and move on to the much more important looking forward stage. I can't let you do this, and I can't do this to you. As much as it might seem like it would be revenge for him, you're going to have to live with yourself for the rest of your life, so you shouldn't go too far and do something you'll regret later. And you shouldn't do anything that the Illinois legal system wouldn't look favorably upon. Perhaps that woke her up from her sadness because she let go of me and took a step back. I guess you're right. I gave him another chance, but this is the end, and this time we end up in court. I don't know how. I've included the name and contact information for a private investigative service in case you need them for further investigation or if you need someone to testify. I've also included the name of the attorney they recommended. He seems like a nice guy and has been very responsive in handling my case so far. He filed the papers, and they were served this morning. Shocked, she took the envelope and thanked me, then started to walk away. However, she stopped and said, "Mr. Thompson, I hate to ask this, but can I call you if I get stuck and need advice? My number is in the envelope." After visiting the testing lab that Caroline Foster had recommended, I sweated for the next few days while I managed projects in Southern Illinois. It was nice to be able to rest at the end of each long day, but the thought that I might have contracted something horrible or even potentially fatal made me even angrier at Victoria and the risks she'd taken for the sake of a few, or maybe many cheap thrills. However, good fortune came my way at the end of the week when the lab informed me that I had no sexually transmitted diseases. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least that danger hadn't touched me. Victoria was still trying to reach me, leaving message after message on my voicemail at work and on my cell phone from other numbers. When I checked the messages, I deleted them as soon as I heard her voice, but she didn't take the hint. When I got back to the office Friday morning, I found there were more messages waiting for me, so I deleted them one by one and pulled out my phone's owner's manual to find how to block unknown numbers. After a few minutes, that problem was solved too. I decided to visit my parents over the weekend. They were getting messages from Victoria too, and I decided to block her number there as well. My mom was especially upset, especially since she knew that Victoria and I were ready to have kids. She even asked me to reconsider the divorce, saying that what Victoria had done couldn't be that bad. I shook my head in response and showed her one carefully cropped photo that showed the date. Tears ran down her face, but she nodded, finally realizing the truth despite her desire to deny it. She hugged Dad tightly as I waved goodbye and headed to my temporary quarters. The next day at work, Andy Smith ran into my office with urgent news just before noon. Marcus, Sarah Martinez's water broke, and it's weeks before she was planning to go on maternity leave. What do we do? I probably should have said a prayer for Sarah and the babies, sent them a gift, and sent Andy home to pack since he was supposed to fill in for her during her maternity leave. Andy wasn't too happy about it since he would have to finish his current project a couple of weeks early, but Mr. Patterson felt he was the best candidate for the job. Andy looked panicked as his project was still almost a month away from such an early completion. After reviewing our project schedules, Andy and I went to Mr. Patterson with an alternative proposal. In order not to disrupt Andy's project, I would take the Indianapolis job in his place, but I would be available to handle major issues on our other projects as needed and could help out in Milwaukee as well. In the evening of the same day, word came that Sarah and her new twins were doing well. I was getting closer to Indianapolis to tackle the project, and with each mile I was getting further away from Victoria and my past. By the time I got to the hotel, it was late, and I slept for a few hours before getting up early to head to the job site. I spent the morning diving into the project, meeting with a few hospital administrators, and going over the plans for the coming weeks. Everything was as I expected it to be, so I left early to stop at the store and head to the hospital to see Sarah. She had already received the flowers I had sent, so I gave her a congratulations card for a job well done on the project and a gift certificate for her children, who had been in the neonatal intensive care unit for a while until they were old enough to go home. Although I couldn't go in to see them, I was able to see them on the monitor as Sarah and Tom watched them lovingly. I was so happy for them, but the thought that I might never have a child of my own hurt when I left. So I turned my attention to the project. It became my everything for the next couple of days, and on Friday, I took the hospital management staff out for drinks in downtown Indianapolis after we closed down work for the weekend. On Monday, Robert Chin called to see how things were going with my divorce. He was having a difficult time. His office was getting numerous calls from Victoria trying to reach me, and she seemed to be getting more and more hysterical with each call. "Are you sure you don't want to talk to her?" he asked. I laughed sarcastically in response to his question, and I heard him chuckling as well. I thanked him and went back to work. In the evening, as I made my way to my extended stay hotel room, a text message arrived on my phone. I didn't recognize the number, but the message read, "Hey Marcus, my lawyer filed the paperwork today, and Brandon has already been served. Can we talk when you get a chance? Thank you, Jennifer Mitchell. It was late, so I texted back to see if she was available. But a few seconds later, my phone rang. Hey Marcus. Thanks for talking to me. Glad to, Jennifer. How are you doing? It's hard, but I'll manage, she replied with uncertainty in her voice. How about you? Since she didn't elaborate, I replied, Sounds like both of us, Jennifer. What's going on? There was a brief silence before she spoke again. Marcus, I wanted to thank you for what you did by revealing what Brandon was doing and making me think before I committed a rash act. You could have taken advantage of how vulnerable I was in that moment, but you didn't, making me stop and think so I could realize how wrong that would have been. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your help. It's not going to be easy, but I'm determined to get through this. Jennifer, we were in the same place at the time, and it wouldn't have been right for either of us. I'm better now, at least a little better, including being away from her, and I'm glad to hear determination in your voice, if not hope. Definitely. I still have a long way to go, but it's definitely better than it was. Good. I started to tell her that if she ever needed to talk, she could call me, but hesitated. Sure, her soon-to-be ex was a scumbag of the first magnitude, but he was one primarily toward her, not me. I was just collateral damage to him when he took advantage of my ex's open invitation. But I still had plans for him as well, so I kept quiet, and we wished each other luck before saying goodbye. While the work in Indianapolis was going well at Mr. Patterson's request, I continued to oversee the work in Milwaukee and was often asked for advice on other projects. I soon felt like I was in the middle of a swamp, up to my armpits in alligators. Part of the reason was Robert, who called a couple of weeks later and said, Marcus, there's news. Mrs. Thompson's lawyer has asked the judge to schedule a mediation session. If he does, you'll have to meet with her face-to-face here in Chicago for at least a couple of sessions, maybe more. The judge will give you time and you'll have to show up here in town, or the proceedings won't go in your favor. What do you want me to do? My blood boiled at the thought of them resorting to such tactics, but Robert had told me from the beginning that it was possible. When we applied, we provided minimal documentation of her infidelity. You said we could hold on to the rest as we wouldn't need them. Now we might need them. What happens if the judge sees them? We'll have to give them to her lawyer, but Judge Martinez might agree to cancel the request if he has no desire to see mediation. Then warn him first, and do it. A week later, Victoria's request for mediation was denied, although according to Robert, Judge Martinez hinted that she might seek counseling for her own issues, and that was one crocodile out of the swamp. For the next few months, while Victoria and her attorney fought in the Illinois courts, I kept a low profile, hoping Victoria hadn't hired someone to find me or maybe cause me trouble. Just in case, I had Robert redo my will and changed my life insurance policy to ensure she wouldn't get a dime if anything happened to me. However, once Sarah and Tom's children were released from the hospital, I visited them a couple of times for dinner and even babysat one evening so the new parents could get out of the house for some peace and quiet. The twins were quiet for the first few minutes after their parents left, but then they realized something was different and let me know with all 4 lungs. As much as I wanted children, afterward I prayed that if the Lord would allow me to have children, He would allow me to have them one at a time. To my surprise, I also heard from Jennifer Mitchell several times, who asked how my case was going and basically asked for strength and courage to go through her own. Without saying much because of Robert's legal warnings and my personal moral principles, I was careful not to cross a line that could be construed as romantic or potentially inappropriate. When things got better for Jennifer, she apparently no longer needed me, and her messages stopped coming. As Sarah's maternity leave came to an end, I had a realtor looking for a house to buy using funds from my pre-Victoria account for a down payment. I bought a house in Evanston a few weeks before Sarah returned. After spending almost 3 months in an extended stay hotel at the company's expense, I was determined to feel more comfortable when I returned home and be able to get my belongings out of storage. The twins were doing well when Sarah's maternity leave ended, and she returned to work for the last few months of the project. After handing over the reins to her, I found myself going home with 3 regrets. The first was that since we currently had no other project in Indianapolis, Sarah would be leaving our firm to become a stay-at-home mom for a while. Tom, who had relatives in the area, had gotten an assistant professor position at Butler, so this was not a surprise. However, Sarah asked me to keep her in mind if we had another job in the Indianapolis area in the near future, to which I readily agreed. Second, with my return to Chicago, I was leaving my unofficial godchildren and what had become more frequent babysitting jobs for Sarah and Tom. The little ones had gotten used to me visiting and caring for them sometimes on weekends so their parents could go somewhere else, and I knew I would miss seeing them grow up. Caring for them reminded me of being childless myself because of the hell Victoria had put me through. Finally, Victoria was still arguing with me over the details of the divorce, and the case was dragging on, although Robert assured me that Judge Martinez was as fed up with it as I was and that the end of the case was near. So when I returned to Chicago, I immediately moved into my new home and began unpacking and doing some work around the house. During my week of vacation time, I met a few new neighbors, including a nice divorced woman from a house a few doors down. Having my own house gave me more freedom, but I was still legally bound to this cheating woman, which meant I couldn't start dating again without fear of upsetting the legal proceedings. I thanked Nicole for the plate of brownies but politely declined when she suggested we meet for dinner sometime. Having been through the divorce system, I think she understood. Derek, who had been looking for Miss Right forever and knew nothing about the Illinois court system, didn't get it. "So when are you going to start dating again?" he asked one day at lunch shortly after I returned to Chicago. "When the judge says my divorce is final, and I can be sure that romantic endeavors and any entertainment that might lead to them won't cost me a single penny in the settlement with Victoria." "So how long? So how's that woman doing?" he asked. "I don't know, and I'm not interested. You know, you still owe her a big one." I looked at my best friend and nodded. "I know, and she'll get it when the time comes. Every last bit of it." Judge Martinez had finally had enough of the stalling and delays. He demanded that we both be in the courtroom for the closing arguments and presentations in early April. With Victoria and her attorney on one side of the court and Robert and me on the other, I arrived a few minutes early and was waiting for Robert when I saw Victoria turn the corner, spot me, and head in my direction. "Marcus, it wasn't supposed to be like this." "I know, Victoria, but you couldn't fulfill your part of our vows, so it's just the way it is. You've been gone so much. You knew how often I'd be gone when you agreed to marry me. The 3 times during our marriage when I exceeded that amount, each time by a day, I used that time to more than make it up to you. Of course, I don't count the last trip to Milwaukee and Detroit since you made up for it yourself with your boss and your other friends while I was gone and after I returned." She looked angrier than I'd ever seen her, and tears were streaming down her face. "Marcus, but I had needs." Victoria noticed several people watching us and asked, "Can we go somewhere and talk about this?" "No, I don't see the need for that. You see, we talked about all this before we agreed to get married. And you promised that your wandering was over and you wanted to get married, settle down, and start a family. You got married, sure, but you failed at the rest. Why don't you just accept it and leave it at that?" That's what I did. "Of course, if you can't, you can always find another therapist. Maybe this one will have better luck than the last one." She wrinkled her nose at my words and practically recoiled when I pointed out her failures. There were more and more people looking in our direction, so I left her standing there, wallowing in her frustration, when I saw Robert heading in my direction. "Marcus, please," she called out, but Robert and I headed into the courtroom, ignoring the others. The judge demanded that we both be present when the documents were signed, probably so Victoria wouldn't drag out the process, Robert commented. He remarked on the fact that this was the first time he was seeing us together, which led to Victoria's angry outburst followed by a pitiful plea. Judge Martinez silenced her and then forced her to hear his ruling. When it was over, the gavel fell, ending our 5-year marriage. I shook Robert's hand and thanked him, after Judge Martinez left the courtroom, but as I turned to leave, Victoria started begging, making her way toward me as I continued walking, ignoring her. She began yelling at me, spewing anger and obscenities. Most people know not to do that in a courtroom, and I'm sure Victoria knew it too, but her anger took over. I'm not sure if any of the court staff arrested her or not, but Robert and I took advantage of the moment to slip out. We had the conversation she wanted so badly, though it may not have gone the way she wanted it to, and that was enough for me. I didn't want to talk to her ever again. Robert did his best to ensure that after her public display, we applied for a restraining order the next day, and Judge Martinez readily agreed. I couldn't have arranged it any better even if I had tried. With a restraining order, she would stay away from me whether she wanted to or not. I almost hoped she wouldn't. A brief stay behind bars might do her some good. But she was too smart for that and disappeared from my life and out of sight. So the following weekend, I started dating again, setting up a postponed date with Nicole. She was nice, but it soon became apparent that we had little in common other than very long dry spells. When I drove her home, she invited me inside, and I didn't resist. The next morning, we both smiled, and Nicole snuggled up to me. "Marcus, we can do this again sometime if you want," she said, confirming my suspicions from dinner that she wasn't looking for anything long-term, much less permanent. I thanked her and headed down the street toward home a few minutes later. Nicole and I remained casual friends but never got together again. I dated another woman the following weekend and then another during a trip to Detroit the following week. After each date, I felt empty, often in more ways than one, as I realized that despite enjoying the moment, I was no closer to my goal of finding the right woman. I needed a friend, a lover, and a lifelong companion with whom I could eventually start a family. Over the next 2 months, I began to doubt that this would ever happen, that I would ever find lasting happiness. Nevertheless, short-term happiness was fairly frequent and quite enjoyable until Independence Day weekend when I visited my parents and watched my sister, her husband, and their 4 children. Mom, knowing me better than I realized, told me that day that I would probably never give her and Dad grandchildren if I didn't change something. "I know, Mom. I bought a house, and I'm fixing it up." "Marcus, a house isn't a home yet. A man and a good woman, not one of those you've been dating can make it one if they work at it. Son, you need to find a good woman." "I know that, Mom, and someday I will. I'll find her. Just give me time," she hummed. "If we give you more time, your father and I will be dead by then and never meet our grandchildren." She was teasing, at least in part, but it still made me wonder. One evening in late July, I received a text message. "Hi Marcus, it's Jennifer Rodriguez. Can you talk sometime when you have a minute?" Honestly, I was surprised to hear from her again after all this time. I finished cleaning up the garage and sent her a quick reply asking her to call me when she could. A few minutes later, she called. "Hey Marcus, thanks for agreeing to talk to me." "No problem, Jennifer. How are you doing? We haven't talked in a while, which is partly why I was hesitant to send a message tonight. I wasn't sure if, with everything that's happened, you'd want to talk to me again." I laughed. "Unless you were actively involved in getting my ex-wife and your ex-husband together, then I don't hold you responsible for what happened between them or the disaster they created. So I have no reason not to talk to you." "Good, because I swear I had nothing to do with it, and I didn't think you did either." "So what's the matter?" "Well, it took longer than expected, but like I said, I'm finally free. I even have my maiden name back, Rodriguez, and I wanted to thank you for your help. You opened my eyes to what that bastard was doing, provided me with evidence for free so I didn't have to spend money I couldn't afford to get it, and then gave me advice on what I needed to do. I went to a different lawyer, but you helped me a lot, Marcus, and I'm very grateful." "You're welcome. Don't think about it anymore. Okay? It's hard, Marcus, because you were my guiding light, my inspiration, if you will, when I was so low and so depressed. I don't know you well at all, but I like what you've done and what I've seen so far. So I'm going to take a chance and do something I've never done before. Won't you have dinner with me?" It was a very nice dinner, but I spent the entire evening looking at her, thinking about how sweet and beautiful she was, and what kind of ex-husband the world's biggest idiot would have to be to mess this up instead of thinking about what we were eating. True, Victoria was just as beautiful and had her own special appeal, but after learning about her secret dark side, the side that would betray the man she was supposed to love more than anyone else, her former rating of 10 dropped to negative numbers, at least in my eyes. "You stare," she said with a smile, "almost as much as I do." I grinned, nodding. It's fun to focus when you have someone so nice to focus on. She blushed and covered her mouth with her hand to hide how much she liked my compliment. You want to get out of here and maybe come back to my house? I think I'd like that, she whispered. Please, Marcus, take me home now. I need this and I can't wait. A few minutes later, as we turned onto her street, she reached into her purse and pulled out her cell phone. Pull into the garage, she said. The door's open. That night, we didn't leave the bedroom except for water and bathroom breaks. I was thankful it was a Saturday and I didn't have to go to work because, for all I knew, I could have stayed with her forever. She fell asleep after our morning time together, and I lay there feeling content. As I got up to use the bathroom, the morning light streamed in through the open curtain on the window, and I got my first real look at her bedroom. Our clothes were strewn everywhere, making me smile at the memory of our urgency. I also smiled at the queen bed, the only item I was familiar with, and her pile of pillows, somewhat diminished by all the ones that had been knocked to the floor. The TV was on a stand next to the chair, tilted so she could watch it in bed if she wanted to, but it was Jennifer's dresser that caught my attention. There were several pictures on it, and I cast a quick glance at them before they made me stop. Probably wasn't very polite, but I looked at one of them and picked it up to take a closer look. Marcus, what are you doing? Jennifer asked from the bed. Jennifer, who's the girl in these pictures? That's my daughter, Sophia. She's 3 years old, and she means the world to me. Her words surprised me, startled me even, and I said, You never mentioned her. I didn't want to bring her into the Brandon story, so I tried to protect her as best I could, but she turned out to be a major issue in our divorce. That's why it took so long. Marcus, I don't want you meeting her until we decide we're serious, that there's really something between us. Where is she now? I tried to keep my voice steady, but I think it went up an octave. She's with him this weekend. Why? Is something wrong? I liked her a lot, but this was a surprise, a shock even, and what it meant. Well, I wasn't sure. Jennifer, I don't know. I like you, though. I really like you, I admitted, not wanting to be dishonest. Considering how long we've known each other, I like you a lot more than I should. But if there's one person in this world I dislike as much as my ex-wife, it's your ex-husband. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. That's what my grandmother would have called this situation. I've already told you that I really want kids, so you can imagine that I'd want to be involved in your daughter's life if things worked out. But let's think about this. If I show up to her soccer game or piano recital or cheerleading practice or school dance or whatever, who else is going to be there? She sighed, starting to realize what I was getting at. Brandon. He's a lying, cheating, but he loves her. Exactly. And every time I see him at one of these events, whatever it is, it'll be a reminder of what he did to my ex and what he helped do to my marriage. I will resent the hell out of him, and I think Sophia, though she won't understand, will realize that there is something between us, some tension. Eventually, she would start resenting me for it, which would hurt any relationship I have with her and, in turn, hurt our relationship, yours and mine. As much as it pains me to say it, I think it would eventually ruin everything we have. She sat up and, almost in a whisper, said, You're saying we have no future. As much as I'd like to try to prove myself wrong, no, I don't think there is one. I agreed. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought it was too easy, too perfect. Now I know it was. Please, Marcus, just go away. She touched her phone a couple of times and added, The garage door will be open for you. She fell back on the bed and pulled the sheet over herself as she cried. I grabbed my clothes and dressed in the hallway on my way out, hating myself at every step almost as much as I hated her ex-husband. It hurt, but in my heart, I knew it was true. Later that day, I went to my parents' house. I gave them the short, concise version, but they both knew that I was saying more than I was revealing and that what I was feeling was hurting me a lot more than I wanted to admit. Mom tried to get more out of me, but I shook my head and told her it would never work. Mom, being mom, gave me a motherly hug, stroked my back, and told me everything would be okay. As much as I wanted to believe it, I didn't see it at the time. On Sunday, we met my sister and her family for lunch after church. There was a long wait for a table at the restaurant, so she pulled me aside and made me lay it all out straight. She was 2 years older than me and had helped me through several failed crushes when I was in high school, so I opened up and told her almost everything, though without any bedroom details, although I suspect she had a hunch about it. "I realize it's not going to be easy," she said later, "but I think you can do it if you try and realize you really care about her. One date doesn't tell you much, and if you had more, you might realize that there's not as much there as you think. But it might also prove to you that there is, and that fighting for it is worth it if you want it. Thanks, sis, and you're right, one date doesn't say it all. But it told me enough to realize that it would hurt a lot more to get close to her and then see it doomed to fail because of the past. Listen, little brother, you won't know that for sure until you try." I nodded and agreed to think about it. After that, our table was ready, and we didn't talk about it again, but the subject stayed in my head throughout the drive home and the days that followed. Derek understood me better than anyone else and agreed with my thoughts on the subject, but it was on the drive home after a trip to a factory near Rockford that I started to think about it differently. Considering how lucky Derek was with women, was it such a good thing that he was agreeing with me? The following weekend, he set us up with a couple of women. We all had fun, and I didn't immediately put the thought out of my mind. During the divorce, Victoria wanted to keep our house as part of the settlement agreement, and I made Robert resist by forcing her to sell it since she couldn't afford the buyout without giving up a lot of other things she wanted. It was pretty petty and cruel, but I figured it was karma given the circumstances, and I didn't lose a minute of sleep over it. Since I didn't want to be involved, I also brought Robert in as my representative for the sale. He and Victoria's lawyer had known each other for a long time, so unlike Victoria and me, they were on good terms. Robert found out that Victoria was going to buy a condo. Sometime later, I heard a rumor that Victoria and Brandon were getting married. Upon hearing this news, I immediately called Robert, as it could affect my finances. During our divorce proceedings, Robert argued to the judge that alimony was not due because Victoria was a cheater and I was the injured party. But the judge took our relative incomes into consideration and awarded her a small monthly amount for 5 years or until she remarried, whichever came first. I think that was the only point Robert lost in our settlement agreement, but even that amount was less than he predicted. "If she really did remarry, I'll check it out and let you know. If it's true, we'll get the alimony payment stopped," Robert said. "Yeah, and if it's true, it just goes to show that some people never learn," I said, incredulous at the thought of them being together and what that would mean, even though it further confirmed my decision to end my relationship with Jennifer. "No," Robert laughed. "It's what keeps me in business. I thought about this back at the beginning of the divorce but never believed it possible." After hearing about their wedding, I decided to contact a friend at Victoria's firm. Will Kleiner and I had known each other since college and met again when I started dating Victoria and discovered that he worked at her firm in a different department. Victoria and I had met Will and his wife several times while we were dating and married, but Will and I hadn't seen each other since the divorce began. So shortly thereafter, we met for lunch when I wasn't traveling. When I told him what had happened, Will replied, "That's terrible. I'm really sorry, Marcus. I heard that Mitchell asked to be transferred to another department. It all makes sense now. They're avoiding conflict with our HR department. So do you guys have an official policy on this sort of thing?" "Sure. If they violate it, they could get in big trouble, and in the long run, the firm could too." "Will, I hate to ask this, but do you think you can get me a copy of that section of your personnel manual?" "Yes. Just don't tell anyone where you got it." The following Saturday, I made a date, and we met Will and Lori Kleiner at a Cubs game. Will handed me the flash drive that night, and a few days later, I went over to Robert's house to talk to him about the whole thing. "Marcus, I'm sorry. Even if you can prove that they knew Brandon was entertaining all the women under him," he said, laughing at his own wording, "that doesn't give you the right to sue. The way state law is written, in an effort to make relationships between consenting adults a less dangerous legal matter, the state legislature got rid of alienation of affection in Illinois in 1981, about 2 years after I started my own practice. It prevents one partner from suing the other for attracting or distracting the other. That goes for the firms they work for as well." Damn. While I didn't care about the money, I hoped that financially penalizing the firm would make them penalize Brandon and, with any luck, Victoria. He smiled. A lot of potential plaintiffs, upon learning that fact, have said that word or something worse. That means no one can sue them except in a very limited number of cases where the firm was positively informed of what was going on and did nothing. In that case, someone taken advantage of by a serial abuser might be allowed to have their day in court, but the plaintiff's chances of winning a significant sum are severely limited. So much so that most lawyers worth their salt wouldn't touch such a case with a 10-foot pole. I sighed and repeated, "Damn." He laughed. "Hey, don't give up hope. Let's deal with the spousal support issue first, and we'll talk about the other options a little later." The next week, Robert was at the courthouse filing a new motion, proving that Victoria and Brandon had obtained a marriage license. Robert asked that spousal support payments be terminated because they were no longer necessary or appropriate under our divorce decree. Victoria's attorney, of course, strongly opposed this motion, and we had a suspicion that the marriage certificate had been filed far away from Chicago so that we would not discover it and file the very motion to discontinue alimony that Robert was now filing. Judge Martinez agreed with us, brushing aside Victoria's objections, and I was relieved of the monthly amount that had been weighing on me ever since he had demanded it. However, when I brought up the second issue, Robert looked at me, shook his head, and pointed his finger at me. "Patience, Marcus. Patience." 6 months later, Robert called me, and we met for lunch a few days later. "Marcus, I suggested you wait because newlyweds need time to get to know each other, and in a case like this, with Brandon moving to another department in the same firm, he's going to be very cautious for a while. He needs time to get his bearings and find a new trail. Just as the luster of a new marriage begins to fade, from what you've told me and from what I've seen of guys like this in the past, I think it's a good time to run a check." It took 2 weeks, but Caroline Foster and one of her investigators proved that just as tigers don't change their stripes, leopards don't change their spots, or whatever the old saying goes, serial cheaters don't stop cheating. Brandon Mitchell had struck up a relationship with one of his new subordinates. So Robert took the information, put it in a nice package, and went to one of his lawyer friends. "We don't want this to get back to you, Marcus, because if whoever replaces Judge Martinez sees your involvement, Mr. Mitchell will say he lost his job because of you. In that case, Mrs. Mitchell would be able to file for reinstatement of spousal support because of the effect your actions have had on her current spouse. I don't know how she would know that because I certainly won't tell her, and if anything happens to Brandon, well, I suspect he won't tell her the real reason." Robert smirked, wiggling his finger in my direction. "Sneaky, sneaky." And it's true. Robert's friend, a lawyer, delivered the package to Brandon's firm. Through my friend Will, I learned that Brandon had been escorted out by security that same day, and there were rumors that he wouldn't be welcomed back. They say Victoria cried when she found out, asking why, but no one would say. "Take that," I said after the conversation ended. "If I keep this up, I risk turning into a bitter old man," I thought, grinning to myself. I realized that was a risk I was willing to take. Not wanting to link my name to this in case Victoria found out about it and took it to a judge to try to get spousal support reinstated, I sent the package anonymously. That same day, and the next evening, I got a call. "Marcus, Jennifer Rodriguez here. I know you probably never want to talk to me again, but I had to call to tell you, Brandon called last night and said that he had been laid off from the firm due to downsizing," he said, "and that he was going to file for a reduction in child support because of it." I called a friend at the firm and learned that there were rumors that he had been laid off, and today I received an express package, an anonymous one, mind you, which probably explains everything and should allow the judge to keep my child support payments the same when Brandon files his petition. Marcus, I guess I know who I have to thank for that. So to that person, I say thank you. I chuckled. I think if you talked to the right person about it, they'd say you were very welcome if they were in a position to admit they did it. As for what was in the package, you might say that some people never learn. I'm assuming that Brandon will tell the judge a sad song about his plight, and then when your lawyer gives the judge that information in response, I hope the judge throws those very words at him. For heaven's sake, he just got remarried. I wonder if he started cheating so quickly when we got married. Jennifer, don't think so. It's in the past, so keep it there. Just smile and enjoy life. Okay? You deserve it. We said goodbye for what I suspected was the last time. At that, I smiled for the first time in a long, long time. I felt free. I'd been through the ordeal, I'd survived, and while some might disagree, I'd returned as much hell and heartache as Victoria and Brandon had put me through, going as far as I dared but not too far. While she was probably cheating again too, I had helped Victoria end up in a much worse financial situation. In an apartment instead of a nice house and with a dysfunctional husband who paid alimony and child support through the nose. In addition, I knew she was in a relationship in which her spouse cheated on her regularly but didn't bother to tell her about it, just as she didn't tell me about what she did to me. I had tried to give her the best and make her happy, but now I suspected she had more worries than she could count. Yes, I had struck back at each of them, but I regretted nothing, not one thing. Moreover, as I went over what had happened in my mind, I realized that I no longer called them those derogatory names that were ever present in my thoughts. Having received retribution, I no longer thought of them or cared what they might think, and that realization led to the biggest smile of all. But the smile was short-lived because over the next few weeks, I made another discovery, the hardest of all. As much as I thought I had gotten even with Victoria and Brandon, to my surprise, I discovered that they still had power over me. When I thought I might have a chance at happiness with Jennifer, I gave up that chance because of the memories of what my ex and Jennifer's ex did, the awkwardness they caused me and, I'm sure, her. Since then, I'd been on a few dates and had been intimate with several women, but after the passion faded, I realized more and more clearly that I didn't care about any of it. Jennifer, I finally realized, was still in the back of my mind, present in my thoughts as much as thoughts of Victoria and Brandon. Even though I'd struck back and gotten my pound of flesh, I still wasn't free of them. As long as I cared what they might think about anything, not until I could look at them and laugh and say, "Look what you gave up and what I might get as a result. Thank you for being so stupid." Then I would truly be free. At that moment, it all became clear to me, and I realized exactly what I wanted to do. Picking up the phone, I looked through the recent calls and found the number she'd called from the day she'd gotten the file with Brandon's latest adventures. I pressed the number to call back and hoped she would pick up. Moments later, she answered. "Hi, Jennifer. This is Marcus Thompson. Can we talk?" "Marcus, recently you helped me again when you didn't have to. I'm listening. Something came to me tonight, an epiphany, if you will. And if I'm not too late and you'll let me, I'd like to talk to you about it, to see if there's any chance of making a difference." There was silence on the line, though I thought I could hear breathing, so I continued. "Even though I recommended that you let go of the past, I realized that I had been so focused on the past and what had ruined my life as I knew it that I hadn't noticed that I was looking at things backwards instead of forwards. I want to apologize to you for that, and if you agree, I want a chance to try to make things right. If you'll let me." Again, she didn't stop me, so when I talked to her that evening, I could practically hear Jennifer nodding her head over the cell phone line, assessing my words. To my relief, she wasn't dating anyone new, and to my surprise, she agreed to let us start over, to see how things went, and if we could eventually become as compatible as we had been that first wonderful night. We went on another first date the following weekend, with good and firmly stated intentions of not rushing things. But sometimes things have their own ideas. She invited me in as I walked her to the front door. She brought out the wine glasses and I poured the wine, after which we sat down on the couch and talked until almost 11 o'clock. A few minutes later, I was carrying her upstairs and gently placing her on the bed. After that, we lay there but didn't say a word. It was too soon, considering it was only our second first date. But in my heart, I hoped it would work out, and from the way she looked at me, I thought she might feel the same way. Although we encountered some difficulties in the months that followed, it turned out that we agreed with each other on far more important things than we had realized, and that many little things don't matter when two people love each other enough. Although I thought so after our second casual date, I liked her more and more with each meeting, and eventually, I admitted to myself that it really was much more than like. Almost from the start. Jennifer came to the same conclusion, and we began to plan and work together so that we could have a future together. We both wanted that, so we got married a little over a year after we decided to try again. When the time came, little Sophia became our flower girl, and Jennifer and I said, "I do" to each other and really meant it. As I suspected, we've run into Brandon a few times since then, but it didn't quite go the way I initially feared. The first time we were close was when he started to make a snide remark to me about taking seconds, but I cut him off. In barely a whisper, so that only Brandon could hear, I said, "Brandon, thank you so much for taking Victoria, the cheater, off my hands. If you think she'll be more loyal to you than to me, you're even stupider than I think you are. And thank you for making it possible for me to be with Jennifer, the real woman you weren't smart enough to be faithful to and do everything in your power to keep. Believe me, I got the best part of the deal." He nearly choked and clenched his fists in anger before realizing I could have torn him apart if he had hit me. Recovering in time to save Sophia and himself from embarrassment, he turned and went to his young daughter. He took her in his arms and kissed her, whispering something to her before putting her back down and saying goodnight to Jennifer. A few months later, he told her that he was in the process of divorcing Victoria and finally realized that what I had said was true. When he started to suggest something, she abruptly interrupted him. "Too bad you didn't realize it until after it was too late, Brandon. Don't ever mention it again." In all the time we've been together, Brandon has never once said a word to me about it. But I still see a note of regret in his eyes when he sees us together, and I always smile. Present tense. Sophia is 6 years old now, and right now she's at Grandma and Grandpa Rodriguez's house, and I'm holding Jennifer's hand while she squeezes mine like there's no tomorrow. When the doctor gives the order, Jennifer makes one last push. Finally, she leans back, and I kiss her sweat-drenched forehead as the doctor and nurse work a little farther away from the delivery bed. After a minute, the doctor looks at us and says, smiling, "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, congratulations. I know you didn't choose to find out beforehand, so let me be the first to tell you that you have a beautiful baby boy." And that's when I realized that all the trials and tribulations I had endured were worth it, and I realized that no matter how hard it was, I wouldn't change a thing. Thank you for watching. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.